We're very excited to have Jane Eng with us tonight. As always, we thank our sponsors, who are the people who help make the lecture series possible, Take Two, Fresh Planet, and DOTS. I'm very excited to have Jane with us this evening. Jane is a senior artist at Campo Santo. She's been in the industry for 15 years, over 15 years, right around that, something like that. Working at places like EA, on things like Lord of the Rings, worked at Maxis on the Spore team, worked at Double Fine for many years on a number of titles, and then most recently at Campo Santo was working on what I consider to be one of the most beautiful video games that has ever been made, Firewatch. I just think it's absolutely gorgeous. And so we're very excited to have you here tonight to talk about your work and your background and have a little conversation about how you do what you do, and then have some Q&A with the crowd. So please join me in welcoming Jane Eng.
Thank you.
So maybe you could start out by telling us a little bit about your work and your background and giving us some examples of some of the stuff you've worked on.
Sure. I brought a few slides. This is not a structured talk, but I guess we can go to slide 1. It's because it's a good indication of like where I started. But
There we go.
technical difficulties. I.
Wait, sorry.
You ruined it.
Okay.
You saw the first slide, which was just.
Okay, you ready?
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
There we go. So I'm actually the one who's not facing the camera because I was too busy playing games. And next to me is my sister. So this was back in the day when you can't save games in, Mario. So she was using me as a save game system. Every time she died, I would take over and play to where she died and then very happily give it back to her. So I was the eager young sister. But that's sort of how I started with games. It's just a family thing. I was very fortunate. My dad always just sort of encouraged us to play with PC games and Nintendo. So I never really thought of games not as a thing that isn't for me. But then again, I never thought it was a job until basically when I sort of fell into games. So I went to school. Back up, sorry. This is too long ago, I don't know. So I grew up in Hong Kong, and then my family moved to Canada when I went to high school there. But my family has always wanted me to come to the States for university, and then as a dutiful daughter, I went to the States for uni, and I went to Swarthmore thinking I want a liberal arts education, but I also want to do engineering because I want to do everything. There I discovered that I really like problem solving, but I also really like doing art. I've always liked doing art as a kid. So there I thought maybe I can do something like visual effects, because that was sort of the thing that people actually had jobs. So I was like, okay, let me just see if I can find people in the visual effects industry to be a mentor. And I sent a lot of cold call emails, and someone actually was very generous with their time and sort of mentored me a little bit. And I was like, okay, please give me an internship. But then they were like, actually, sorry, I just quit visual effects and I decided to go into games. I was like, really? That's a job? I like video games. Can you still take me as an intern? So that happened, and I was in California, so I spent a summer of my junior year being an intern in a company that was basically what you would call a really small indie game. It was like a garage studio. But there I discovered that, hey, all these people sort of spoke my language. They knew who Guybrush Threepwood was, and I could make video game jokes and they would get it. And I was like, oh, maybe this is something I could do. And and then I went back the next summer and then sort of just backed my way into a job, and they sort of just reluctantly kind of hired me after I just moved to California after college and sort of. So this is not advice for what you do. It somehow worked for me, and I was just like, wow, that was kind of nuts. But
So when you were a little kid, were you more of a math type person, or you more of a art type person, or was it just always a blend?
it was always kind of a blend. Like, I know my family friends, they always thought, oh, she's such a good artist, as in like, I don't know, I could copy drawings or whatever. But I was actually really good at science in school. So I always just thought, oh, it's like art is a really fun hobby that I'm good at, and like it was a hobby, but never really thought of it as a career choice.
Did your parents pressure you in one direction or the other? Did they have dreams for you? Did they want you to be?
My parents just didn't want me to be a doctor because my dad is a doctor, and he's like, unless you really, really want to, like, be a doctor, don't be a doctor unless, just don't do it because you think that's what a family does or something. But otherwise, no, and I guess I'll tell funny stories, is that when I first went to college, I was like, I would be an engineer. Then halfway through, I decided, I really like making things pretty. So maybe I'll switch my major. So I actually ended up being major in visual arts, and I had enough courses to minor in engineering. That's what I did. So I told my parents, I was like, Mom, I'm going to switch my major to art. And they were very supportive, but apparently they kind of frantically called my sister and said, is she going to starve? My sister said, oh, if she's good at her job, then she'll be fine. So thank you, sister, for calming my parents. So yeah.
So you have control. You can.
Oh.
That's the forward button.
We've
and you
been
can
staring.
change them
Okay.
however you
Oh,
want.
okay.
Yeah.
So I guess I should
Yeah.
talk about what I've done. So I guess Lord of the Rings was sort of like my first real job title. So like that first company I worked at folded quickly, but everyone there somehow got scooped up at EA. So that was sort of how I ended up being there. And then I also worked on Godfather. That was the EA's first open world game, actually, and I got to be a lead artist on that game. So that was really fun, and I learned a lot. And then I transferred to Spore because I thought it was so cool. I mean, that was so long ago. Do you all even know what Spore is? Oh, okay, good. Also learned a lot. And then I joined Double Fine, first for Brütal Legend. So I grew up playing Tim's games, so that was sort of my dream. And then when they started hiring for Brütal Legend, I was like, come on, I'm gonna go there. And they hired me. Also worked on Stacking and The Cave. I was a lead artist on The Cave. And then afterwards went to join Campo. So that's me. Sorry, I'm meandering. I'm sort of
That's good.
I'm bad at answering questions sometimes.
Yeah. So I mean, however you want, if you want to keep showing stuff, I'm curious about this particular process. So talk a little bit about Firewatch.
Sure. So Firewatch was an interesting thing because it's not really a game that, like when people ask like what genre is Firewatch, the joke was always like, what is Firewatch? Because like I don't even know what genre it is other than I guess it's a walking simulator. So imagine when Sean and Jake first pitched to me to quit my job to join their non-existent company. So that was interesting. But I was really a big fan of their work on The Walking Dead, and I was sort of already looking for a change because I was at Double Fine for 6 years. I was very comfortable, but I was like, maybe I should be less comfortable because, this industry changes a lot, and I don't want to become being afraid of change. So I was looking around a little bit. And so they showed me these. And this is the first doodle by Ollie, actually. So as you can see, it's insane. Like the first thing he did was just the logo we ended up with. That's Ollie Moss's genius. So they just tried to describe to me what Firewatch was about, and I was really attracted by the fact that it's going to be more of a sort of a mature story about like things that adults care about. I generally sort of like that kind of media, so I was like, oh, you know what? I like games, and I feel like I've been making a lot of sort of funny games and like things that are sort of entertaining, but I also want to work on something that says a little more. So, So these are kind of the early concept art that they showed me just on the phone while we were chatting at a bar or something. They're like, yeah, check out this cool stuff, and you can make a whole forest, and you'll be the only 3D artist. And I'm like, hold on, what? But I was sort of intrigued. You know, it is one thing to be sort of like a lead artist on of an existing studio, but it's definitely a super new thing to be like, hey, let's all work with people we've never worked with on a title that is has an interesting premise, and nobody's worked in Unity before, but it'll be fun, right? And at that point, I actually thought that would be a fun thing to do. I knew it was going to be hard, but you know, why not? We all thought, well, like, the worst would be this game doesn't get made, but we will learn a lot and we'll hate each other and we'll find jobs again. So thankfully, I was in a situation where that worst case was actually okay to me, because I felt like, well, if I feel like I was in a little bit of a creative rut, not rut, but like I needed something to kick me into gear to learn something new again. So this would be like, well, if this doesn't work out, as in if the game doesn't ship, then at least I would have learned Unity, which everyone was starting to use.
So this was the first Unity project you worked on?
Yes,
Okay.
it was everyone's first Unity project, so that was very interesting. And only Sean and Jake worked with each other, and all the other team members never worked with each other. So this is what the game looks like now, in case you haven't seen the game. I don't know who here actually has played it. So yeah, it was about 2 years of work. It was mostly me and Ollie are the two main artists on the team, but we also hired a prop artist and also a VFX person. So yeah, so that was an interesting project. We can keep talking. I'll just have like visual aids.
Yeah, no, tell us about the trees.
Trees. So
The trees in Firewatch are beautiful, and there's lots of them.
So for about, I would say like 18 months or so, I could never go outside without just staring at a tree and just trying to analyze how could you make all that with just planes. And it's a really hard thing to make, like trees. I don't know if you've made trees.
Trees are trees
like
and foliage in general
thing.
are one of the things that I think is hardest to do well in 3D, and it's often the place where a lot of 3D environments seem weakest. I think Firewatch is extremely good at the way it does trees and foliage, and it said there that you did this all by hand. You weren't using a middleware or treeware of some kind.
So I had to make it by hand because SpeedTree was what everybody used, but SpeedTree was not integrated in Unity back then, so we were like, and then I guess I just had to figure it out. And
So
people
you
have been making trees by hand, way before SpeedTree, so it can be done. But also, you realize that very few games have pine trees, because of all trees in the world, pine trees are the absolute worst in terms of being made in 3D, because pine trees are all made of little puffs, like little needles. So trying to imagine you have to make a paper craft tree, but you have to make little puffs and needles,
Right.
So that is extra hard to sort of simulate, because you don't want to draw all the little pines, because then it would just be really busy looking. But then how do you abstract basically a giant bundle of needles, But then you also have all this requirement about draw distance and everything, because for Firewatch, we knew we wanted for you to be able to look very far, which means you might have hundreds of trees, and then there are a lot of technical issues, let's say, for even just the technical aspect is challenging, and also the artistic side was also challenging.
So you made 23 trees, and then does each one of those trees have a bunch of variations, or are you saying that's it? There's just these 23
They're
trees?
mostly just these.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
See, copy and paste works.
I guess it works.
It's all about copy and paste.
That's kind of surprising. It does not feel repetitive in the forests. Game.
I think my secret sauce is always just to copy and paste until people call me out on it. That's why I'm a really fast artist, because I'm gonna keep copying until I notice, or until somebody else says, I think these are the same trees, and I'll be like, damn it, and I'll make a new one. But really, not that many people noticed.
So you're not, so you're like, you take a clump of trees, you place it somewhere else, you rotate it.
Yeah, I mean, you rotate it.
Are you scaling it?
We don't even scale it that much,
scale it.
actually. But
Mostly
like
just
in the
rotate it.
forest, you really can't tell, right? Because like the
Yeah.
whole thing is like, if you have only 5 trees in a scene, you'll probably notice.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole point of Firewatch is to make an environment where you're not focusing on 1 or 2 things. Like
Right.
my main goal to bringing all these work to life in 3D is to feel that it's a real place. It
Right.
doesn't have to look photoreal. Like something that feels real does not have to really look real in a way. It just has to give you that feeling that everything is
did
real.
you do any, like, did you study a particular biome? Is this like a location and you went and
Yeah.
what kind of trees are there? And-
So Firewatch was very specifically in Wyoming, in the Shoshone Forest. It's not specific because that's actually near where Sean grew up. He wrote the story, so he has a very specific place. So these trees actually are more or less the real-world dimension, so that's another thing. I feel like a lot of games, when they make trees, they're really giant, epic trees, very fantastical trees, but that's why they don't actually feel as real in the forest, because I think like environments also have some sort of an uncanny valley. Like your brain just knows if like a chair is not the right size, or if a bunch of pine trees is too small or too big. So that's why I've heard from people who know Wyoming to say like, oh, that really feels like Wyoming. But I think that's just because I just looked up how tall are the trees, how tall are the pine trees in Wyoming? I was like, well, I guess we'll just have 3 pine trees that sort of fit the range.
Did you guys go camping? Did you go to Wyoming? No?
The furthest we went was Yosemite, but that's not at all like Wyoming.
Okay.
But at least that gave Ollie Moss, who was the art director on the team, he was from the UK. So that gave him a big idea of like, oh, I see what you mean when you mean like a big forest. You know,
Right,
like
right.
it's hard to.
Yeah.
It's hard
Like a
to.
dinky forest
you
like
know.
Sherwood or something.
Yeah. So like. So the sense of scale, it's, you know, like American wilderness has that kind of
That's true,
scale that
yeah.
other places may not.
Yeah.
But that's as far as we went. We went camping once.
Yeah.
We wanted to do more, but
So this was your first Unity project.
Yes.
It's gorgeous, right? To my eye, a lot of games in Unity have that look, have the kind of Unity look, and Firewatch doesn't. Is there a secret? Is there a trick? Have you now, after having done this, do you have any particular insight into how to make games in Unity look great?
I think a lot of the times Unity games seem to look the same is because everyone turn all the good asset store assets that they buy to 11. You know, so for Firewatch, a lot of what we did actually was just to make sure that everything is just, you just stop at when it's enough. Like I said, like we had 23 trees because it was enough. So we didn't spend the time at like making more things, but we focused on what are the things that we think are important for the look. Like for example, I said it was important for us that the game feels real. And when we think about like what are the things that make it feel real, I guess I can actually just, that talks about it a little. So our whole game, actually everything to scale is like sized wider, about 16%, just because somehow, you know how game cameras sort of warp the way a space feels? We've been to a Firewatch lookout, which is normally 14 by 14. But we just like kept scaling stuff in the game to be like, you know what, actual dimension 14 by 14 doesn't feel right. So we scaled everything until it's like, oh, I guess around 16% is around it feels right. And we just sort of like made sure everything, as long as it feels right for the game, that's when you stop. So like, hey, do we need normal maps in the game? Some things do, but actually a lot of things didn't have normal maps because like it doesn't matter that, you know, like a rock just needs to read like a rock. You normally don't focus on a rock when you're hiking. You just focus on the general landscape, like the way everything feels. So why spend more time on one asset to make it like more technically competent when you can just be like, 2 hours of work is done. You focus more on the general aspect of how the atmosphere is.
There's a style that Firewatch has, which is in some ways very naturalistic, but in some ways kind of stylized, right? So it's not photorealistic. It's not super. How intentional was that? Did you go into the project thinking, okay, this is the look that we want to hit, or did you kind of try a bunch of things and end up with this?
So Ollie Moss had a very graphic design background. So Firewatch was his first game. So definitely he brought that kind of sort of graphic look to the project, and that is definitely a goal we had from the beginning. So like the first concept art you saw was sort of very graphic, but we never knew how close we could get to that, and we had a few tricks up our sleeve to just like get the stylistic fog in and some way stylizing the trees. If you're interested in that, I actually had a GTC talk that went a lot into the details of this stuff, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about that. But
it's an amazing talk about volumetric fog and
the layers of colors was
Yeah.
really something that was really key in Ollie's work, so we just like made that work well for us. And
So that was, you were inspired by looking at like graphic design, poster design, and then trying to recreate that in a 3D space. Okay.
Yes. So like my job as a environment artist, like I'm not the art director. It's funny because some people always say, oh, your art is so great. It was always like, it's funny to me. I'm not like trying to be modest or something, but I never really feel like I'm the artist on the team because I'm not the one coming up with like the vision. I always feel like, oh, I'm the one who is just implementing someone's vision. So I see myself more as a craftsman or like an artisan. So since that's Ollie's style and that's the thing that looks very different from everything else. I mean, the goal wasn't just to like, oh, let's look different than other Unity games. It's more like, that's Ollie's style. We all really like it. This is the key art we really gravitate to. So we just try to make as much like that as possible. And that's my job, is just to bring as much of what's beautiful about that art out. Instead of going like, oh, let's just turn everything. Because in Unity, it's very easy to just like, oh, buy all this cool stuff and then just like turn it all on because it looks amazing when you turn it on.
Could I ask you a little bit about the process? So on Firewatch, for example, you started with these gorgeous kind of concept sketches that Ollie was doing, and then it was primarily yourself, and you said there was one other person doing 3Ds, but you built all of the geometry, you built all the 3D stuff, and then you were also the person responsible for textures and lighting, and what about character design? Is that
the character Henry was also done by somebody else.
Okay.
Because that's definitely not my strong suit. I could do it, but it will take me like 5 times longer than it should. So that is done by Syndra. I forget his last name, but he's very good.
Yeah.
Also, I don't do any animation. James Benson does our animation.
Okay.
So our process usually is that we have, I actually have more slides on it later, but we'll get to it. We sort of developed the game in a way sort of chronologically, which was not intentional, but it just sort of ended up that way. So the story people sort of gets together and figure out what the story needs is, because that actually informs the layout of the world. One of the design feature, or the sort of the tenets of the design, is that Firewatch has to be a contiguous world, which really sort of limits how much we can do with the space, especially if you want people to be able to go anywhere, anytime. But Jake Rodkin, who is one of the founders of Campo, he took up a lot of the sort of level design stuff, as in he would just go, okay, I know that this place needs to be connected with this place, and he would just do a very basic sort of gray box that just needs a link so they can try out and see whatever, and then once they're pretty sure that that may be what they need, then I go in and sort of pretty things up.
And that first pass gray box is happening in Maya, in Unity? In Unity itself,
Unity.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We sort of did some sort of gray box process for Firewatch, but I'm not actually convinced that that's actually the best way to do it.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny because one thing we really learned in Firewatch and gray boxing is that a space that you think is too big when it's a gray box can easily be too small when all the stuff is in. So like Firewatch does a lot of walking and talking. So at first you're walking from a blank room to another blank room, you're like, this is the most boring thing ever.
Right.
And then, especially when you don't have any VO, so you just have text going on the screen.
Yeah.
And you're like, this is not a good game.
Right.
But then once all the trees and stuff start to get in, and you're like, oh, this is kind of fun just to walk around.
Yeah.
And then once the VO gets in, you're like, oh, wow, I really want to just spend time walking around listening to her talk to me. And then suddenly you're like, we don't have enough space to walk around and talk. And you're like,
Right.
damn it.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
gray boxing could lead you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, because like for us, the gray box and the end experience is so different that
Yeah.
like it was really hard to gauge if a space is successful when it's just purely in the gray box stage.
It's interesting because I'm just theorizing here that gray boxing in the context of a first-person shooter might not have that problem
Yeah.
because in a first-person shooter, right away you're thinking about lines of sight and access and
Yeah.
traversal through
Yeah.
the space, and you want to get that stuff right before you
Right.
put in the props and the
Yeah.
textures and the line. But in a game like Firewatch. You don't have the equivalent of shooting because being in the space and wandering around is the point.
Yeah, like
Looking and
talking to her
experiencing,
and looking
yeah.
at stuff is the shooting.
Yeah.
You know.
So what?
Basically.
Yeah. So what will you do instead if you're not going to be doing gray boxing for your next project?
So later on, I think we still have. I mean, you just have to do gray boxing because without it, it's even worse. But I think what we would define as a gray box has to just be a one level higher. So it got easier at the end when we have enough trees and enough rocks. Oh, so sorry. These are the rocks that we have. We only had like 10 rocks or something in the game. Copy and paste. So once we have enough of these sort of Lego pieces, then Jake, when he was doing the layout, could at least put in some trees and
Right.
some rocks, and then I would light it really quickly. So like our gray box process actually included the lighting, because that gave you enough sort of like, oh, this is the sunset moment, enough trees when you're walking around to sort of fill in the gap in your mind that you're running through a space. That helped a lot, but I don't know how to solve this problem because it's just really hard. Like in terms of
Okay, now are the rocks you're showing here the game rocks? Oh yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
these
so
are
this
the
is
game rocks.
Wow, because they really look like paintings before you showed the polygons here, right? They
See,
really.
the trick is that it's only gray.
Here, back it up. Show the ones without the polygons. Yeah.
So like all the rocks in the game.
I thought this was like sketches for reference. Okay.
So all the rocks in the game actually are just gray, and in ZBrush I just like highlighted some of the edges and that's it. Like there's really no other texture in it. But it worked,
Really
so I
nice
just
looking.
stopped working
Yeah.
on it, and then we're like, okay, that's good enough. So
Those are
that's
some good rocks. I'm not gonna lie to you. I like those rocks.
the one thing I learned about rocks is that actually you can over sculpt rock really easily.
Oh really?
Yeah. So
How would you know? Like, what does it look like?
So it would look like a poop, basically, if you sculpt it to it. So my trick is just to give myself like, okay, I'm just gonna sculpt something for 20 minutes and then stop. And if I hate it, I just leave it for the next day. And usually by the next day, I'll look back and I was like, oh, that's a nice rock, cool. And now I'll keep it.
And what are you using at this point? What tool are you using?
This is ZBrush. I usually do a really quick sort of Maya, just a shape, and then I go into ZBrush. I think some of these I even skip the Maya and just be like, I just need a kind of like a square rock, and I just did it. So the rocks were the easy part. Oh yeah, and this one just sort of shows how I made a few modules and just copied and pasted it 100 times to make a hill. Yeah. That's pretty good. Ta-da! Yeah, that one. That's the stairs. That's just like 20 of those rock. Yeah, cut and paste.
So the stairs were
It's just one rock.
one rock assembled. Okay.
Yeah. It works, so I'm like, okay. So the funny thing is, like, originally I just made it for this shot, forgetting that actually in the game you do go there later on, but I actually don't think we even needed to change it.
Wow.
Like, it looked fine. So,
And what about, I mean, I don't know what slides you have, but what about these gorgeous skies in Firewatch? Like, what
the skies.
like, where did those come from? Were those paintings? Were those
The sky
models?
we have, now Unity actually lets you change the sky a lot easier with the procedural sky material. But back then we used a tool called Marmoset Sky Shop, but basically it's just, the sky is just a gradient. And the lighting is also done by the sky. It's just image-based lighting, which works really well for outdoor spaces. So it worked well for us, but it was nothing special. Like, do we even have clouds? The clouds was the one thing that we really wanted to make dynamic, but I think at most we just painted 2 domes and rotated them a little.
Oh, okay.
It's like, we really want beautiful clouds, but like, it's a really hard problem, and we didn't really have a technical artist on this.
So when you say we painted 2 domes, you painted the domes?
so
Ollie
like,
painted the domes?
all the painting is Ollie.
That's Ollie. Okay.
Yeah. So most of the time, so I guess back to the way back, the process question. A lot of times I do first pass textures that I hope Ollie will have time to paint over.
Okay.
But we just shipped a lot of the first pass textures.
They're perfect.
They're like fine. This is like like we only change those when Ollie sees that I don't want to ship this, and he fixes those. But otherwise, we shipped a lot of my first.
So
pass
what happens when it's ugly, Jane?
Okay, there we go.
Tell us.
This also goes into the processing. So this is sort of like what, in the beginning, when the story folks were like, oh, okay, we want to go down like a ravine, and then Ollie would just, oh, how about something like this? Oh, that's nice. You can sort of go down a shape like this. And then, more drawings, really quick drawings. And then let's go to a gray box. That's like the first gray box for that area. What is this? It's nothing. It's terrible. Try to evaluate if that space works for your game. It's no. A little better, not really. But the stuff is there. See, there's a campfire. And then I try to make it a little prettier at this point. It's like, okay. But it's still pretty ugly.
This is still pretty early in the process?
Yeah, I think this is actually one of the first spaces that we tried to make. So this is when I'm like, I don't know how this game is going to look. I guess I'll just keep trying. And if you look closely, there's a never nude Henry. There's a scale. Also, yes, definitely put a scale human in your scene. Otherwise, you would make something that's totally the wrong scale.
Oh, okay.
Actually, there's 2 never nude Henrys in there.
What's going on?
And then we're all like, this space doesn't work. And then so Ollie would take sort of like, okay, that's how about I paint over a little and we aim for this sort of mood. And then I keep going back at it for many, many times, and then this is what we ended up shipping. So, it was ugly for a good long time.
What about that grass? Go back 1 second and like.
That's
really
just
nice.
Unity grass.
It's hard though. I've seen Unity grass. A
Also,
lot of
Uni-
students have made games in Unity with grass. It doesn't usually look that good.
Ollie just painted a few.
So what's the? Really? There's no
It's just
secret to
Unity
making
grass.
good-looking grass? Am I wrong?
See, the thing is,
you can spot Unity grass from a mile away, and it looks like.
But if your rock
patches.
is also one color, it kind of works.
Okay,
see?
I think that's one of the things is that.
Like everything is consistently half-assed, and it actually looks good.
Right, but specifically this very limited palette, like everything here is very close to the same hue.
Yeah.
And that helps the grass kind of like blend together.
Actually, the reason why I made sure the rock is only gray is because we know we wanted a lot of colors in our scenes. But if your rock has any other color in the diffuse, it's really hard to get it to light in other colors. So I was like, all the rocks is just gray. All the color comes from the lighting. So.
And what about the color of the ground behind the grass? Is it really important to match those two things so that, is it just, again, a thing that you did and it just worked?
I mean, it's not something we're super happy with, but then you also just go like, how much time does your player look at that while they're playing the game? Like, never. So you don't focus on it.
Nice.
So we're like, oh, actually, for a long time we didn't have any player shadows, and we're like, oh, we need to figure out how to do player shadows. But like, if you make a first-person game, the actual player model does insanity stuff because there's no head. And then the arm is like 3 times as big. Sometimes, just once in a while, 3 times as big because you want this animation to look good in that one angle.
Right.
So we can't use that. So we have to, that means we have to animate another person just to make good shadows. And then we're like running out of time.
Yeah.
And then we decided, screw it, let's just put a circle on the ground. Nobody noticed, apparently. So we were just obsessed with it, but no one said that our shadows suck. Well, maybe you do, but you don't yell at us about it. So see, what you care about sometimes is not important. So.
All right, keep going. What's next? What do you got?
Yes.
Yeah.
So yes, it really isn't anything special here. It's just Unity grass.
Yep. That's good.
This is my favorite stuff.
Oh, so nice. Right.
Yeah, I wish I have more time to do more objects, but these actually take time because you can't copy and paste. So I only did a few, and then we hired someone so that they can help while I make the rest of the forest.
And what was the process for this? Also similar, Maya, ZBrush?
Yeah, Maya. Actually, I don't think these have ZBrush.
Just Maya.
Yeah, just Maya. Because I was like, why would you sculpt this? This is just like a cube. And then I just textured it in Photoshop with some gradients. That's really it. There's no normal maps on these either.
Okay.
So, maybe on that antler, I think. But, but I don't think on these other ones. Oops.
I always think about 3D games as, the thing that always kind of freaks me out is the number of people in the world who keep making chairs over and over again. Like every 3D game has chairs in it, and every person has to like start with like, what's a chair? Well, it's like a rectangle. It's like, and then you extrude it, and then and at a certain point, will we have enough chairs, or like, did you make chairs for this, or did you just like get a chair from somewhere?
I think we made 2 chairs.
Okay.
But then again, it's a forest, so there's not that many chairs.
It's true. Turn them into chairs.
I think if we had more variations, it's because I was like, can we please have another chair? I'm just going to make another chair because I don't want to make another grass meadow. But it was all just kind of up to me. Like I don't want to have. There's not that many sort of man-made areas in the game. So there's Henry's Tower. That's another place that is sort of full of research equipment. That one is really object-heavy. But we actually tended to, we were very intentional about okay, this is a wilderness area, but all the human-scale places, we want it to be packed with quite a lot of unique stuff. So, we did end up having more chairs than necessary because we were like, well, this is the place where you don't want people to go like, wait, that's Henry's chair. Does that mean that there's a conspiracy? Because, you don't want that to happen. And you're just like, in case that happens, just make another chair. And I'm like, I'll make another chair.
It's funny because, on the one hand, I want to be like, just use a chair, just find a chair. And use it. But on the other hand, if you look at these objects, it is true that each one of them has a kind of style, like that typewriter has a chunkiness. It is stylized. It's not super realistic. You would not get that from the asset store if you got a generic typewriter. It would not fit into the Firewatch. Like that's the 3D object equivalent of that style of kind of brushy, graphic, simplified shapes. So it really does add up to something, spectacular.
Yeah, we focused sort of most of my object time on things that are in Henry's home base, though you do see them a lot. So we're like, okay, let's just make sure this stuff really is sort of hand done to the way we really want. But then some of the later stuff, we're just like, we just need a cot. Just make a cot, And we're not as specific about it. There is definitely some sort of style drift later on in the game with different objects, but then you're like, at that point, people really invested in something else other than like picking on your art style drift, and you just have to go with it. Yeah. Speaking of actually buying assets, though, one thing, I don't know how many people know, but we actually rewrote the last third of the game, maybe in August. We shipped in February, so we were done in the game in December, and we rewrote a third of the game in August. And suddenly...
Why is that?
It was bad.
Okay.
So we were like, well, we can ship this game, but it will be bad, or we try to push it, because originally we were trying to ship in 2015, and we had pushed it eventually to February 2016. But we think it was worth it we were just like, okay, we'll find a little money, and then we will fix the ending to be good, and then... Well, okay, I'll just tell you why the ending was bad. Like, originally, you were supposed to just, like, not be able to talk to Delilah for a third of the game. And we were like, but that's actually the best part of the game, so now what are we doing? So that was bad. And
was that unanimous, or was there friction?
There wasn't friction other than that. We were like, if we still want to ship this year, this is not happening.
Yeah.
But when you have a certain budget, that is a little bit of a tension. But good thing our business guy is also the writer, so. So like, well, if you can make it work, you can rewrite the last third of the game. But then the new ending sort of required us to just have another person in the game. And then I was like, you want me to make another person? And we wrap up in 2 weeks. I was like really freaking out until I found one on TurboScript, and we're like, yeah, this is fine.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
So.
Okay. Did you tweak it, or?
We tweaked it a little.
Okay.
Like, but mostly not.
Nice. Jane, can I ask you about lighting? You talked about lighting earlier, and that's another thing that I, as a non-3D artist, it just terrifies me a little bit, thinking about the complexity of how to light a scene. So what's your thinking and what's your process when you sit down to light a scene?
It's a lot easier when you have something to aim for, so I always request my art director to just give me a color script.
What's that?
A color script is kind of just like little small thumbnails of different scenes in a game, but like with only the colors in mind. So you don't have to draw everything in there, but like give me sort of, oh, this scene is supposed to have these colors because it needs to feel like this kind of sunset, or it needs to feel this kind of dread or whatever. Because that stuff is really hard to communicate with words. It's a lot easier for someone to just, especially a good illustrator, can just like, oh, this is what a serene, cold morning should feel like. And then we show it to everyone, and then people can be like, oh, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Or like, no, that's not at all the vibe we were going for. Then you can talk about it in very quick color sketches. And then once we sort of agree on like, okay, this is what day one's sunset should feel like, then I just try to push it as close to that color script as possible. And then we do a lot of paint overs, as in, I get it maybe like as close as I can, then we take a screenshot, and then Ollie will just like paint over it in Photoshop. And most of the time it's like, oh, that sounds about right.
And then you tweak the lighting to match that reference.
Yeah.
Interesting. So it's going back and forth from 2D to 3D.
Yeah, we do that a lot. And like we specifically made our tools to allow us to do a lot more sort of just painterly, sort of artist-friendly tools, I should say. Because at the end, I was just like, okay, I need I need to spend all of my time doing other more technical stuff, and then Ollie can actually just take over doing a lot of the fine-tuning of the lighting. So because so much of it is just like for example, the stylistic fog that we had like drives a lot of the color on screen,
right?
And that is completely controlled by a texture strip, so he can do it.
So you're modifying this texture strip, and then that changes this volumetric fog, which affects the colors and all the space. And so that's an example of a tool that you guys built from scratch, or a tool that you modified. What's another example of a tool that you guys tweaked?
So that tool just came really quickly, because when I first looked at all these stuff, and I knew that, well, all these layers of colors, I guess we could try to do it with fog. And then Sean and Jake looked at me like, what do you mean fog? That's crazy. I'm like, trust me. And then I talked to a graphics guy, and I was like, can you just make me something that would change the color with fog, according to how, like, from the depth from the camera? And he's like, sure, I can do it. That seems pretty easy. And we just mocked it out, and then, I showed sort of like how much your color actually is affected by fog if you really crank it up. And it flattens the shapes too in the fog, which is actually what we want.
Yes. Yeah.
So that was like a thing that really worked for us.
Yeah.
So that was pretty early too.
Yeah.
But
And what's another example of a tool that you guys tweaked that it felt like? Was there anything else any other?
I guess, that's right. The sky shader is something that we tweaked. So we were like, okay, all these paintings are so specific in terms of what the color of the sky is. And as I said, the sky dome actually affects the lighting. We just made a tool that lets us pick different colors on like a gradient, basically. And whatever color you pick is just going to be the color on the dome. It doesn't matter if it's not mathematically correct as a sunset. Because like now the current Unity procedural sky does this weird thing where you change some sort of atmospheric thickness. I'm just like, what the hell is that? I don't care what it is. It's not giving me the color I want.
Right.
So like, we just go like, just give me the color. I don't care. I don't care if it's not realistic. Just give me these colors and it will just pop it out.
Right.
So I guess we tweak that.
Yeah. Did you have any other? I don't want to. Did you have any other slides? I don't want to miss out on.
No.
Could I
think so.
ask you about some of your inspirations, other art that you look at outside of the world of games? Is there anything that you draw from as inspiration or reference?
That's always a hard question because I mean, I play games, but I don't really. This is going to sound bad, but I spend so much time making games that I try to not spend a lot of times also in games when I'm not working.
It doesn't. Yeah.
I would say when I have free time, I like traveling. Or just going on hikes. I feel like that stuff really actually affects me more than just looking at other games.
What about film? Is that something that you ever look to for reference or inspiration?
Not really.
Okay.
Because it's funny, because I feel like if I were an art director or someone who's like a concept artist, that would affect me a lot more because if I have to come up with a look.
Right.
Whereas for me, actually, like since my goal is to just bring my art director's vision to life, I feel like looking at other work sometimes doesn't really help. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you've been doing this now for 15 or so years. How much has changed? Like, do you think that it's like a huge difference in the way that you do your job and the way that you create this art?
So it changes so fast that I always feel like I'm still a newbie. So it's always a little shocking to me when like so many people here don't try to listen to me talk, but I'm just like, but I'm just learning like everyone else. It just changes so fast. I mean, like right now, for example, we're working on something new, and I just learned how to use Substance. Anyone use Substance here? I love Substance. If you don't use Substance, you should use it. It's amazing. That, to me, entirely changes how I do textures now, like in a better way. And I know a lot of people think, oh, but like Substance, PBR is all for realistic stuff. No, it's just a tool. You can do realistic stuff with it, but you also don't have to. It's just a tool that really just streamline your workflow. Cool. Other things that change, oh man, VR changed stuff a lot actually, in an unexpected way though. So I came from a time when I did PS2 games when you had to know exactly how much memory you have and yada yada yada. And that became not sexy because now we're like, oh, people have the portfolios with the billion polygon sculpts, and then I remember feeling kind of insecure about it for a while. And then 2D games became a big thing when the Facebook games was around. Remember Facebook games? That wasn't that long ago.
Give it up. Give it up for the Facebook.
So I remember feeling like, oh, my skill set value is just dropping and dropping and dropping. And then VR came along, and somebody's like, oh, you care about frame rate? You know how to make low poly? I'm just like, yeah, shouldn't everyone? So that was really unexpected because now knowing how to make your art assets efficiently is cool again. Even though it should be cool all the time, but I guess people just didn't care about it as much. And also actually all the big money that was going into VR pushed a lot of performance stuff that happened in like Unity and all the stuff that I don't think actually would have happened if there wasn't such a big bucket of VR money.
Right.
So it just changes all the time, I feel like. It's hard to catch up.
Let's open it up to the audience and see if there's any questions from people out here. Yeah.
So you probably learn how to make games while you're on the job. How do you feel like that influences your process now while making games?
Yes, I definitely learned on the job because when I started, there was no game program for studies. Like I feel like everyone just learning on the job. So that to me, it's just like I don't even know what it means to learn how to make games in a classroom environment. I always just experiment is how you learn. So I guess that in a way helps me in that now I know, we need to learn substance. Like that is not a scary thing because I'm just like, well, that's what I've been doing every day anyway. So I just try things out and I always stop when it's good enough. So I always joke that when people are like, how many programs do you need to know? I'm just like, okay, I've used Maya for like 15 years. I think I know the 50 buttons I need to know, and then I don't know anything else about Maya. So I feel like sometimes learning on the job give you that kind of sort of, I wouldn't say confidence, like that like comfort with just like, it's fine to just use a tool for one thing. You don't have to be an expert in all the things because there's so many programs. You can only, just like use it for what's good for you and it's fine, Don't be embarrassed about sometimes I don't know the super basic stuff about Maya, but I'm like, I didn't need to use it then, so now I know, but whatever, it's fine.
Great attitude. Yeah.
I'm playing your game, it's really beautiful.
Thank you.
So much. I'm from Europe, and I'm really a bit depressed by this whole anti-environmentalist discourse right now in the United States. And then you play a game like Walden, or you play your game, or you see a film, a new Disney film, Coco, a bit against that anti-Mexican discourse right now. But this idea about environmentalism and showing how beautiful nature is, and you walk around in the game and you meet a deer and you hear about how dangerous it is to use fireworks. Is that environmentalism a kind of a discussion while making the game?
I think a lot of it was influenced by, as I said, Sean Vanneman, one of the founders of the studio and the writer. He grew up in Wyoming, so a lot of, I feel like Firewatch is actually a very personal work from Sean's heart because that's where he grew up, so a lot of it is just, like the big wilderness is something that is a huge part of just what, like his identity is just like, I love nature. So I don't know if it's not more intentional than that, other than that, like, all the team that was gathered, like, all thought, like, this will be a really worthwhile thing to do for 2 years, I guess. I definitely joined because I thought I would want to spend 2 years making a really beautiful forest space. And I do love nature, and I, get sad when people don't want to protect nature, but, it's not more intentional than that, I guess.
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about comparing the 3D art and environment art that you were doing with Ollie's drawings and trying to get it right based on the things that he was doing, but did you ever have a time when you were trying to also have that same kind of getting it right with the narrative in the game?
So I'm going to repeat the question just for our home viewers. In the same way that you're thinking about the relationship between the 3D art and the sort of 2D graphic representation that is the concept art. Was there ever a time where you're also trying to find a match between the art you were doing and the story in the game? Is that so?
Yeah, all the time, because I feel like another part of the reason why I wanted to join the team was that they really believe that storytelling is not just with the words, like narrative is more than just like what people are saying. Like the environment is also part of the narrative. So for example, designing Henry's living space and the research area and another living space, all that was, like I really wanted to make sure that like, hey, what would somebody need if they need to live here? Like I actually, for example, was like, how would Henry get water? I don't know, let's look it up. Like that kind of stuff adds to the narrative in a way. But in terms of like solving things, yeah, like let me try to figure a good example. I mean, so much of the game, it's contiguous, but it's also like gated by story moments. So that actually is a huge part of my job, is to figure out how to make sure we can effectively gate people from areas before they're supposed to get there. And since it's nature, you can't put up a gate. Well, we have one gate in the game. But a lot of times it's just like, how many times am I going to put a rock in front of what looks like a road and you can't go? So a lot of that is done to serve the narrative, actually. Like we know we have to block your visibility until a certain day, all that kind of stuff. There is a time when I think there's a fire that happens and it clears away a part that you can then move through. That took a lot of problem solving to even figure out how we could do it. And there's definitely a lot of back and forth from the story team, because sometimes they were like, originally they were like, how about we have a hunting lodge, and then in there's like a cool, scary moment, and then I was like, do you want to push the game 3 more months? Because you can't have it if that narrative is important enough that you're willing to push the game. So like there's also that kind of back and forth. Like sometimes I have to go back to them and be like, what exactly is important about this space? Like if I only have 1 week to spend on this area, what is the story you want to tell in this area? Then we can spend time on it. Because otherwise, I can spend a month making a pretty space, but it needs to serve a narrative.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so Jack Kerouac, who wrote On the Road and Dharma Bombs, became a fire watcher. And he had a tower in Washington State somewhere, which is like a shrine that people go to. Did that influence your work in any way? One other question. And is it just synchronicity that we had all these recent fires in California?
Yeah.
That this becomes a very topical game. My sister lives in Sonoma. She was 2 miles away from the house burning down.
So there's 2 questions here. One, Jack Kerouac became a fire watcher, and was that something that the team was aware of or influenced? And then also, what about all these fires in California that have happened?
Yeah, so we definitely read up a lot on people who became fire lookouts. We actually interviewed people who've done lookouts and just talked to them to be like, what do you remember? Like, what was the thing that you did? So definitely a lot of influence from people who were actually lookouts.
Jack Kerouac in particular.
I think so. Like not for the art part specifically, but for I'm pretty sure that they looked into that. And the fires.
The fires.
Yeah, I mean, like, we live in California, so fires is always on our mind, but I don't think we specifically decided to go with the story because of the fires. Like, a lot of the reason why actually, it's funny because it all seems very, like timing-wise, it seems very convenient that, fire, so like fire lookout. But actually, I think we picked the fire lookout because it came from a different constraint, is that like we knew we wanted to tell a story. Sean and Jake knew that the news studio wouldn't have enough resources to make people on screen. So that means, and he wanted a wilderness game. And then like you cut down all the possibilities of telling a story until you're like, I guess maybe they could have radios. And if it's just one person, why would you be out there alone? Maybe what about a fire lookout? I remember fire lookouts when I was a kid, and that was cool. So that was more that kind of process that why we had a story about a fire lookout.
It's so interesting because I think it's something that it's hard to remember. I think it's difficult sometimes for students to keep this in mind, how your limitations of your own resources and your own capabilities are the materials that you're working with.
Yeah.
Like, you have to embrace them, and this
Yeah.
is such a great example. Your story is a
Yeah.
wonderful example of how that's it's not a bad thing. It leads to this very original
Yeah.
and beautiful result.
Right, because I think the main goal was to tell a story about like adults dealing with solitude or like big life decisions and like running away from things. Like, you can tell that sort of theme story in a lot of different settings, but I think it was a lot of the other limitations, plus the fact that Sean grew up in Wyoming and have an affinity for, like, the Shoshone and lookouts and all the stuff that sort of became, I guess this is the thing that we can put all the pieces together and be able to make it with like 10, 12 people.
Yeah.
So.
I think we have time for one or two more questions. Let's go all the way in the back, and then we'll come back here to the midpoint. All the way in the back. Yes.
So you mentioned that you were also responsible for decisions on aiding the game. So how much of the level design, like the blocking, did you do, or was there somebody else that was responsible for that at all?
So the question is, how much of the level design did you do, the blocking out of the levels?
A lot of the main, the like big areas and like this chunk needs to be accessible on this day is done by Jake. A lot of the smaller grain stuff, like we know we don't have to see all the stuff to the south side, let's say until day 4 or whatever, then it was up to me to just be able to hide the fact that we're just unloading the entire half of the game. Like, that kind of technical side is up to me, but like the stuff that serves the narrative is done mostly by Jake, because he's the one sitting in with the story and can like, and I work with him enough that he sort of knows maybe like this area is sort of good enough for Jane to be able to hide. Or like be able to explain why you can't get over there, or like, we can maybe put a cliff here. He also just next to me, so it's not like he's not like a different department or something. So when I say Jake is responsible for it, most days then he's the one doing it first step, and then ask me, is this good? Is this like, let's like check in and see if you think it's a good first try, for example. But a lot of it is just back and forth since we all sit next to each other. So, but my main responsibility is just to create the visual explanation for why you can't go somewhere, and it won't be like, that's just a glass wall. What is this? Because the last thing you want to do is kick people out of immersion, and you can very easily do that if you just randomly have an invisible wall. So we try not to do that.
Can I ask about the sort of the rhythm of that part of the process? How much time are you spending sort of in Maya or in Unity
Yeah.
versus entering into the space and walking around? Like, is that a loop that
Yeah.
you do? Like, you do a little tweak and then you go in the space and you walk around, you look around, and then you go back out? Or is it just once at the end of the day? Or like, what's that rhythm like?
So like in the beginning of the project, when I was still making a lot of the Lego pieces, like making the trees, making the rocks, most of that was not in Unity. And that's when the story folks are trying to figure out what the story is, and then sometimes Jake is doing some gray boxing. But like once we start production, I mostly work in Unity, and I was just like do tweaks and then just immediately walk through the space. Like
okay.
I would say multiple times an hour, because like to me, looking at it from any perspective is not useful, right? Because like your game can look beautiful from an angle that the player will never see, then what's the point? It needs to just make sense for the player, right? So like anything the player doesn't see is just like totally crap. Like I don't care about it. So sometimes it really messes me up when they're like, one time it's funny. So there was a canyon that we were like, okay, this is a canyon that we walk through, and I was like, great, a canyon means that I can unload everything to the left and right. That's perfect. And then Jake, like 2 months later, was like, I think it would be a really good idea if we make a path that go on top of the canyon, then the player can just cut back. And I was just like, what do you mean? The whole point of a canyon is to make sure people don't see on the other side. Now you're on top of it. But, I understood what Jake meant, and I sort of agreed why for various narrative and layout reasons that actually became the best path for the player.
But again, that bothered you because it affected your budget of how many
or
polys you can use? Or?
Sort of. Or a lot of it's actually view distance, because the thing that limits it the most in Unity actually is the draw call.
Okay.
I don't know how technical I should get here. But
Okay,
basically
technical. Let's do
so
it.
draw call is like, actually that's I mean, you were saying how the Unity grass is beautiful, but like Unity grass is really bad for draw call. So basically, it's like how many objects you can draw on screen. And sometimes you can batch things, like if you have 200 rocks, but if they don't move, you can sort of, in the engine, batch it all to be like basically as one draw of like 200 rocks at once. But trees that need to move, that gets a little crazy, and then there are all this like alphas, blah, 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 blah. So in summary, the fewer trees you need to draw, the better for everyone. So controlling visibility in a contiguous space is really important for us, because Unity like the draw call stuff isn't great. Like the Unity terrain, actually I think each blade of grass is almost as expensive as like half a tree or something. It's like crazy. It's like really not optimized in a way that like really hurt us. But we realized too late to rewrite the whole system. But anyway, so that kind of thing hurt me in a sense that like I sometimes designed a way in the world, like we cut up the world so there are chunks that gets unloaded and loaded depending on where you are, and those decisions are sort of based on the assumption of what you can see as a player at a certain point. So if suddenly you're telling me actually you're not on the bottom of the canyon, you're on the top, that like
So then that would affect,
changes everything.
If you had designed a vista that had a view in the distance, you might not be able to do that anymore because you have to load this other thing over here.
Or it's more like, back in that canyon, I was expecting you to not be able to see anything else. But now we're suddenly seeing the entire south side of the game. Then how do you solve that? Right.
I think let's do one more question and or maybe two. Why don't we start here and
So in terms of actually designing.
Go ahead. No, go for it. Yeah. No, that is you. That is you. And then we'll go back. Yeah.
So I guess a question I had. So you talked a bit about gray boxing. In terms of actually designing out the landscapes, like how did you go through that process from like a high end to then a technical end? And then like struggles, where did that work? Where did you kind of have friction?
So the process of like making a landscape, and where was the friction in that process? Like anything especially challenging?
I think the most challenging part is, like I said, the sightline control issues. Because you do want people to feel like they can go everywhere they want, but we're not really an open world game. The engine's not built for that. So that is the most challenging thing, because like I feel like before you can even make a space pretty, you got to make sure you know where your walls are. So like if I know I can't see more than this far, then I have to figure out why. So does it mean we have a hill there? Does it mean you have a canyon? Like all the stuff affects, because like in terms of the layout, it doesn't matter. Layout just means you can't access that area. Right. But like, are you visually blocked by it, or is it a canyon? Like that's sort of up to me. So once in a while I'll be like, I feel like the player has been sort of penned in for a long time. I think it's time to give a player a grander sense of space, and I'll try to put a vista work, like make a vista work in there, just so that you go like, oh yeah, I'm still in the forest,
Interesting. So
keep that in mind.
If you look at the entire world of Firewatch that the player ever has access to, how many chunks is that? Like how many separate pieces, roughly? Can you give us an estimate?
I actually don't remember, because I think
Roughly.
geograph, I would say like, there's actually maybe 100 something, what we call sectors. Yeah. But they're not actually all spatial. So we have different chunks of sort of spatial terrain sectors that came from the time when we deluded ourselves into thinking that it's not actually going to be like an open world and we could cheat things. We can't cheat anything. But then we realized that since you can't just draw everything all the time, we came up with a solution of like, how about if you can see way over there, how about you just don't draw all the small stuff in it, like all the brush, the tiny rocks, you don't need to draw it. So we put all of that stuff actually in a different container that exists in the same physical space as like your terrain. And then later on we also like, okay, now actually the game logic also is in a different sector. So like all of those are our chunks. Got it. Even though not every chunk is like a unique bucket. It's like there's sub-buckets in each bucket kind of thing.
All right, so one last question right here. Yeah. I'm sorry, the person behind you, I apologize. They had their hand up the whole time, I apologize. Yes.
I was going to ask why you chose to use Unity for your project with an interactive with people who didn't know it.
That's a good question. So we chose Unity because that was our only choice. Unreal was not like an option back in, what was it, 2015 or something?
Why not?
Yeah, that was not, they didn't have a subscrition thing then. So it was basically if you have $1 million, you can talk to us kind of thing. So we're like, Unity it is, woohoo! And we knew people who were shipping games with it. Like, we know the Fulbright Gone Home folks, and they were shipping. So we were like, well, we can use something that's shipped games. That sounds good enough. So that was it.
So now, you mentioned that you're working on the next game. I know it has not been announced. I know you can't tell us much about it.
I really want to talk about it.
Can you give us a crumb? Can you tell us, is it anything? I don't want to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But what can you?
It's not in the forest.
Okay. You heard it here first.
Actually, like when we were just starting to think about different ideas for game 2, they were like, okay, anyone has any ideas or whatever? And I was like, I have one request. I didn't even just talk about a tree. I was like, can we just have a wall with no windows in it, please? Because like the toughest thing about Firewatch is that almost everything you can see through. Like, even your own lookout tower is full of windows. So you can't occlude anything, which is another thing to limit your draw call, is just to put an occluder in a wall. Like a wall, then you don't have to draw anything behind it. So I was like, please let me have a wall. So we have walls.
So there will be walls. And I'm sure it will be gorgeous. Thank you very much, Jane.
Thank you.
It was a wonderful talk.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.